千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now. To be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process of the Tao. As previously mentioned, the Chinese title for 58, 为政章, for governance. That is the name of this chapter. Governance in the Tao, especially in the Tao Te Ching, is always about governing your life or managing your life. So this chapter picks up on the train of thought from the previous chapter, 57. And I remarked last time that I felt that this was the one chapter that can potentially have the biggest impact on your life. So I wanted to reiterate that for the people who are joining us for the first time. So here's what the chapter looks like. It's medium length. It's not short. It's not like some of the longer chapters in the Tao Te Ching. It does pack a big punch. So what we did previously was that we divided up into 4 sections, and the 4 sections are mostly 4 lines each. So it would have been 16 lines, except that in the last section, there's an intro line. Therefore, the sages, line 13. So here's what we ended up last time. We got almost all the way through. We got to line 15, close to the end of the chapter. And you can see from this slide here that the last section contains 4 lines that talk about the sage. So the intro line, therefore the sages are, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 points. Prior to that, in the 3rd section, it talks about the confusion of people. So from the people to the sage, from confusion of the people to the wisdom of the sage, this is actually painting a progression. So if you look at line 11, the confusion of the people, down to line 13, therefore the sages are, and then descriptions. This is what we have to pick up on. So in order to do that, to get the whole picture, we have to backtrack a little bit, recap to line 11, and then go from there. We want to make it easy to see about what exactly is confusing for most people unless they follow the Tao. And when you follow the Tao, it's a spiritual path that leads you eventually to the level of the sage. Let's take a look at the details, starting with line 11, confusion, as a recap from last time. So previously, we focused on this particular slide for line 11 that talks about the confusion of people. And then we went through and talked about exactly what they were confused by. And prior to this line, above this line, the chapter talks about how things shift back and forth in life. Fortune can shift to misfortune and then back again. Here, in the lines immediately above the confusion of people, you see there's 2 other yin and yang pairs, complementary pairs. There's rightness, strangeness, there's goodness, there's being wicked. So Basically, what it's saying is that right and wrong, acceptable, not acceptable, good and bad, these are things that don't stay still. These are things that transform into one another. This causes many people to be confused. They eventually just kind of shrug and go on with their lives. So, to give some examples to make that concrete, last time we talked about how it wasn't that long ago when looking down on a certain group of people for whatever reason, this used to be something that people did not find surprising, did not find to be offensive, did not find to be objectionable. But now, looking down on a group of people for whatever reason, at least frowned upon. Now, it is commonly realized that indeed this is wrong, no longer acceptable. So things do shift back and forth. What used to be acceptable, not acceptable anymore. Lao Tzu is saying that the Tao is the only eternal constant. It's the thing that doesn't change in a world where everything changes. It is the only thing that can be a reliable source and guide to right and wrong, good or bad, and you don't find the Tao anywhere in the world, you find it within. Then you see it reflected everywhere. So this is the beginning of one's journey. It's the journey that we're all on. We started out confused about the world. There are things that require clarification. So we continue forward on the path. We get to line 13 that we talked about last time, 圣人, the sage. So this is a person who has wisdom of the divine, wisdom of divinity, divine wisdom, a person, a sage who is divinely wise. And it's important to note, once again, that sages are human beings who have attained wisdom. They are not deities. So Lao Tzu was human, even though in religious Taoism, he is worshipped as a deity. He actually was just as human as everybody else, a human philosopher, one of many, not a deity. So then we want to, last time, depict this progression from 11 to 13, from the confusion of the people to the state of being a sage. It's all about progressing from someone who doesn't understand the Tao to someone who does. Therefore, transitioning from confusion to wisdom. Now, it's an important point to recap because I want to reiterate that if you do encounter someone who is supposed to be wise, that other people claim is wise, tell you that this person is wise, but then this person says things like, the more I learn, the less I know. Oh yeah, that sounds superficially wise. It's become a cliche, a platitude by now. Or someone who says, I have no idea what is good and bad, right or wrong, with an air of humorous wisdom. Well, I would say beware. That's not actually wisdom. That's just being pretentious. If, on the other hand, you encounter someone who's able to provide you with penetrating insights, who is able to point out a few things that causes all the pieces to fall together, to come together like a jigsaw puzzle, that suddenly there's clarity, well, okay, chances are pretty good. That's someone with actual, genuine wisdom. And in fact, in one of the stories that I will relate, it is what Lao Tzu does in writing as well as in person. For now, though, let me show the progression. In the Tao, it's confusion to wisdom. And I can set that next to the progression of Buddhism, as we did last time, to make it easy to see. So in Buddhism, sentient beings, 众生, are said to be asleep. Not literally asleep, although everybody is asleep, at night. Mostly at night, not everybody. Asleep here is just a metaphoric way to say that they have not spiritually awakened to the full and complete reality. And indeed, there's a school of Buddhism called the Complete Reality School. In order to awaken from the state of being asleep, quote unquote, Buddhists practiced Buddhist Dharma. They learn, understand, and practiced Buddhist Dharma. And in Mandarin, that's 佛法. That's in the middle. The goal is to become Buddha. As mentioned last time, Buddha is a noun, and it comes from the verb bud, which is to wake up. Buddha is the one who has awakened. So when you say it that way, it no longer seems quite so mysterious and exotic. Buddha also was a human being who has experienced the awakening rather than a deity. And of course, subsequently, in religious Buddhism, the Buddha is worshipped as a deity. It seems that there's a human need to find something to treat as a deity. So to the right, you're going to see the corresponding counterparts in the Tao process. Prior to people knowing about the Tao, they are ignorant, they are confused, they are just people, 人. So instead of practicing Buddhist Dharma, what people do is they cultivate the Tao in daily life, 修道. Now these terms are not mutually exclusive. Someone who practices Buddhist Dharma may decide to dig into Tao teachings and then learn from that. Conversely, someone who's cultivating the Tao may include Buddhist Dharma, scripture, doctrines in study. There is no exclusion either way. There are no rules against finding and choosing and absorbing whatever wisdom you find from anywhere in life, inside or outside of Tao teachings or Buddhist teachings. So the counterparts to the Buddha in the Tao paradigm is 圣人, the Tao sage. So rather than to say the Tao sage is someone who has awakened, typically the description is that the Tao sage has become one with the Tao. The sage embodies the virtues and the path, the Tao, the way. So this is how things are usually seen from an Eastern perspective. Between the basic level, the beginner level, and the attainment of enlightenment, there's a long drawn-out process of reflection, study, meditation, etc. So I think this makes that process really clear. And last time, we also wanted to clarify exactly what gets the clarity of wisdom when you go from ignorance to the wisdom of the sages. So in the Tao, the idea is that the fog of confusion will be lifting and your view of reality becomes increasingly clear. And as you can see here, in the metaphor in Buddhism is that the sleeper wakes up. It's sort of like when we say, hey, wake up and smell the coffee, Stop dreaming, you're not asleep anymore. So let's talk about examples of confusion to wisdom, asleep to being awake. In this chapter, we talked about a few things. We started out talking about misfortune and fortune. So confusion happens for a lot of people when they encounter good things and bad in life. So after a while, you definitely see a lot of people just kind of shrug and say, well, stuff just happens. What are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? Can't do anything about the weather. Can't do anything about the traffic. And another form of confusion when you encounter misfortune or fortune is when you see someone saying, well, who knows if it's good or bad? Well, that is the surface level wisdom, and it's drawn from Tao stories like the frontiersman who loses horse. So let's talk about what real actual wisdom is. It's a little bit beyond that level. To the right of confusion, the Tao, a Tao cultivator works with what happens in life. Clear perception is the key. What I mean by that is wisdom is the ability to see the totality of what happened. The totality includes the part that is detrimental, like losing a horse, or something that's beneficial, like gaining a horse, but also the part that is potentially detrimental, like breaking in the horse, becoming injured. That's potentially something that can happen, or potentially beneficial. The injury makes one exempt from military draft, thus saving one's life. That can be a benefit. Whatever the case may be, and I want you to apply this every time you see something good or bad happen, see the totality. The clarity of the complete view should be what drives your actions and decisions. Think about this for a moment. The world is full of people who are confused about right or wrong, good or bad. They say things like, yeah, there's no real right or wrong, good or bad. It just depends. It depends on the circumstance. It depends on the situation. It's all relative. It's all illusory. Some will go a little bit further and call it illusory. It's all in the mind. In such a world where we live, there's a lot of confusion and uncertainty. Everybody is adrift. They're not sure about anything. Imagine for a moment that you cultivate the Tao, and the clarity gives you the insight to create your own internal compass. So when people are adrift, you have a direction. You know where to go. When people are uncertain, you are the Rock of Gibraltar. You can offer steadiness, certainty, consistency, your own penetrating insights, your light of illumination that you can offer to other people as an assistance. If you can do that, you can imagine the influence and the impact that you will create for other people that is very positive. Then you can see this is exactly what a Tao sage does. It's the reason why people are naturally drawn to the wisdom of a Tao sage. And the characteristics of the Tao sage that we're going to talk about today are the same ones that you can develop in yourself. If for no other reason than that they make you a better person. To help you along the way, last time I used a story to illustrate the point. And the story is about this idea that in the story, the drunk does not realize how drunk he was. Think about how that's true to life. We have all seen and perhaps also experienced ourselves that when you are affected by alcohol, your judgment is impaired. I'm sure that comes as no great surprise to anyone. You may think you're still okay You may say, oh, no problem, I can drive. You may say, yeah, I'm a little buzzed, but I'm not that drunk. I can still drive. Well, the truth of the matter is, you're not in the best person to tell how impaired you are. So in this story, the drunk thought he was making progress rowing his boat, but actually he was going nowhere. Applied to spirituality, it's very similar. Those who are asleep, unaware, or ignorant of the Tao, they don't know that about themselves. They don't know that they are asleep or unaware or ignorant. In the story, the boat was still tied to the dock with ropes. Those represent attachments, holding you back. When the drunk wakes up in the morning, that is metaphorically speaking equivalent to becoming aware of one's attachments in life. Then to untie the ropes is to take action based on that awareness. Because it's enough to know that you have attachments, you have to let them go. And then finally, freeing the boat, being able to get somewhere, that's a common metaphor in Eastern traditions, representing a spiritual voyage where you are getting someplace, that you are making some sort of progress spiritually. So this was the story last time to kind of frame an overall discussion of transitioning from confusion to clarity to wisdom, and then the factors, the attachments that prevent you from doing that, the obstacles, if you will. Then we started to get into the characteristics of the sage. In this chapter, there are 4 of them. The first one that we talked about was being righteous without being scathing. So it's good to be on the right side of things. It's good to do things for the right reasons. And it is important, however, to not let being righteous go over the line into righteous wrath. Being right does not give you the license to rub everybody else's nose in it. So this line says righteous without being scathing. Being scathing is about being critical of other people. And last time we talked about how line 14 corresponds exactly to line 5 from chapter 56, a couple of chapters ago. But these ideas, there's a thread of the same idea that runs throughout the entire Tao Te Ching. And there's another chapter beyond 56 that also contains the same ideas. But I want to simplify the discussion and just highlight 2 so they're easy to see. So the similarities between line 14 and line 5, as we talked about last time, the scathing, being scathing is to be critical and harsh against other people. That's why line 5 says to blunt the sharpness. The sharpness is about the sharpness of critique, harsh words. So the bottom line is, Tao sages, and indeed Tao cultivators as well, are demanding of themselves, but they will not be demanding of other people. The sharpness they have is internally directed for self-discipline. So that's important. Then we also talked about the second characteristic. It says incorruptible without being piercing. Now, scathing and piercing, these 2 lines actually go together. To be scathing is to be critical, to be piercing, the same. To be piercing is to also be harsh, pointed, damaging, harmful, hurtful against other people. Now, incorruptible is about possessing integrity. And just because you possess integrity, that also is not a license for you to wield as a club to beat other people into submission. So sages require integrity in themselves, and that's it. They don't dig into other people's business. They don't require that everybody else must also have integrity. It's up to them. Everyone makes their own choices. So the sages will never try to find fault or point blame. To point blame is to be piercing. So we also covered this last time. And similar to the previous line, there's another line of correspondence from 56. So take a look. Line 15, incorruptible without being piercing. It actually matches line 6 from 56, unravel the knots. Well, how does that work? Unraveling the knots is metaphorical language for multiple things. It can be to simplify complexity, which is related to resolving a dispute. Disputes with accusations and counter-accusations often become very complex. So to resolve a dispute, a lot of times people will look for an arbiter, someone to judge one way or the other, to do arbitration. They will look for a person who doesn't side with either one of the two contending sides, someone who is incorruptible, someone who has integrity, can be trusted to render a fair and impartial judgment. So that's the context that ties the two together. And you want to be that person, you want to have integrity, you want to be impartial, fair, just, etc. But you don't want to be scathing as a result. You want to be able to resolve the disputes in a fair and equitable way, one that will be agreed upon by all sides. You want to bring the peace. You want to be the peacemaker. And that's why it's important to not be piercing, which is to, again, find fault or point blame. The whole idea in the Tao is to promote harmony. So those two lines go together. So that finally brings us to the point where we left off, so we can complete our discussion. We are now in line 16. I felt that it was important to recap back to confusion, take everybody step by step to right now, because now the whole thing makes sense together. Let's take a look at line 16. Straightforward without being ruthless. To be straightforward is to be down to earth, is to be transparent. Well, it's like when we say, hey, be straight with me, don't throw me any curveballs. And when we say things like, stand tall and be a straight shooter, it's all very similar to the language here. It is in accordance with the Tao. It's what we want to deal with other people in a very straightforward, very honest, and plain-spoken way. A sage who speaks in riddles is a stereotype. An actual sage, a genuine, authentic sage, would be very plain-spoken. But just because the sage is plain-spoken, very straightforward, quote-unquote, the straight shooter, as we said, that doesn't mean the sage will be pointing to all the perhaps, obvious flaws that someone has. Hey, you weigh too much or too little. Or, hey, you are messy. Hey, you are this and that. The sage is characterized by being kind, gentle, uses a light touch, still makes the point to help other people improve, but doesn't need to be mean-spirited in doing so. And today, we definitely do see in real life that there are people who pride themselves as being honest. Oh, I'm very honest. oh, I have no filters. They say that as a point of pride, but then they talk about things that are really mean-spirited. Now, the sages, on the other hand, will never use being honest as an excuse to criticize. To be sure, if you ask the sage about something, the sage will provide his opinion exactly, but unprompted, unsolicited, the sage would not, suddenly assign himself the responsibility to point out everything that he sees as wrong. That would go against the gentleness, the softness of the Tao. And more importantly, the sages never assume that they have attained some sort of superiority over other people. And this is because the ruthless kind of honesty contains an element of malice. If you think about it, if you analyze it, when people say, after some critical remarks, people say, I'm just being honest. Think about that for a moment. I'm just being honest. The problem with that phrase is that it isn't actually used with kindness and good intentions. It's always used with hidden agenda, like, look how smart I am. Look how much better I am. That would not be the sage. So as before, with the other two characteristics that we have seen in line 14 and 15, line 16 also corresponds with another line that I will go ahead and lay out for you. In 56, you can see that I have identified line 8 in chapter 56, mix the dust, with line 16, straightforward without being ruthless. Now, I mentioned that being straightforward is to be down to earth, straight with people, without pointing to faults. That's being ruthless. Mix the dust can also be translated as mix with the dust. It's metaphorical language for talking about how you become part of the community, that you're just one of the group. You're just someone who participates fully in a community as an equal with everyone else. You're not above them, you are with them. So that characterizes a sage. You're just being down to earth. You are engaged, you are involved in the community because you want to help. You don't want to dominate people in a ruthless way. Then one more line, and then I'll provide an example to illustrate this. Illuminated without being flashy. This is line 17, also the last line from chapter 58. So when we talk about illumination, it's spiritual illumination. Another way to interpret the light of illumination would be mental brilliance. Let's stick to spiritual illumination for just a moment. The Tao sages illuminate themselves spiritually as well as other people. They help themselves and they help others to light their way. So to be bright, to be illuminated, to shine or to be lit up brightly, this means to be visible for something that's positive. Now, what if you are too bright? That can certainly happen. Then you become flashy, blinding. The flashy ones may be brilliant, but they make people uncomfortable with the glare. To shine too brightly is to call attention to oneself. It's a way to say Look how great I am. Look how brilliant I am. Look how cool I am. So in comparison to that, which is the goal is to draw attention. When they do that, the sages are quite different, because the sages recognize to draw attention is an attachment that is sourced in the ego. So in the story that we talked about last time, this will be one of the ropes that ties the boat securely to the dock so the boat can't get anywhere, which means your voyage toward enlightenment goes precisely nowhere. You're not moving an inch because you're still tied to that attachment. So in comparison to that, sages recognize that, like all attachments, the pride, the ego holds people back from any progress. That is why the sages themselves provide a soft glow that doesn't blind people, that is sufficient to light the way, but not so much that other people need to shield their eyes. That is to say, sages are the ones who do not show off. They don't display themselves. They don't flaunt in an attempt to get more attention. Now, this, of course, is tied to a line in the previous chapter, 56. This one is the easiest one to find the correspondence because the character light, 光, appears in both. So if you look at the highlighted line 17 of 58 on the top half of the slide, the first character there, that's the character for light or illumination. You see it, you see the exact same character as the last character, the third character in line 7 of 56 in the bottom half of the slide. So these two correspond with one another. The top is illuminated without being flashy. That's from chapter 58. Then 56, dim the glare. So now I think you can see exactly how they are connected, associated with one another. So now, to illustrate this idea that includes 16, 17, to be straightforward without being ruthless, which means mix with the dust, mix with the common people, and also dim the glare, to be illuminated, to illuminate others without being flashy, glare, blinding with a strong glare. To illustrate that, I would like to take you to a story written by Zhuangzi about Lao Tzu. So the name of the story is The Lesson of a Lifetime. And let me share that story with you. And again, it's a story from Zhuangzi, and it takes place once upon a time during the warring stage period of ancient China. There was a man by the name of Yang. Yang was a devoted student of the Tao. He revered Lao Tzu as the greatest teacher of his time. The two of them lived far apart from one another, but they kept in touch through written correspondence. One day, Yang, the students, needed to travel toward the south. And at around the same time, Lao Tzu also had travel plans. He needed to travel west. The two of them realized that their paths would intersect, one going south, the other one going west. So they arranged for a time to meet each other at a halfway point. So finally, after all that correspondence, they were going to be able to meet in person. So Yang, the student, was really looking forward to this. For him, being able to learn from Lao Tzu directly in person, why, it was the chance of a lifetime. So they coordinated their travel schedule and, as planned, found each other on the road at the time that they had agreed upon. They then walked together toward their next stop. They discussed the Tao as they walked. After a while, Lao Tzu looked to the sky and sighed. He said to Yang, he said, I initially thought you would be someone I could teach, but now I see that is not the case. This was a strong rejection. Yang was shocked by these words. He was being rejected just when he thought he would have the greatest opportunity to learn directly from the master. What was going on? He did not know what to say. Lao Tzu kept going, and Yang followed. They continued walking together, but now in silence. Eventually, they reached the inn, a tavern, which was their planned stop for the day. At the inn, Yang continued in the role of the student. In accordance with the custom of courtesy at the time, he served Lao Tzu as his teacher in cleaning up, washing off the dust from their travels on the road. After they were both properly cleaned up, settled down, he approached Lao Tzu. He said, Master, I have a question that I did not dare to ask while you were busy walking. Now that we are resting here, may I ask, what are my faults that would make me unfit to be taught? In response, Lao Tzu said, you show so much arrogance and prideful attitude that people will be afraid of you. Who would even want to be near you? Remember the Tao. Someone with the greatest integrity would always assume he is still tainted with flaws. Someone with the most abundant virtues will always feel like he does not have enough. Well, you do not seem to understand, and that is why I cannot teach you. This was another shock to Yang, because he never thought of himself in those terms. His expression changed as he thought about it and realized Lao Tzu was absolutely right about him. Humbled, he said, Master, I hear your reprimand with respect and will take it to heart. Now, earlier that day, when they first arrived at the inn, Yang had the arrogant, aggressive demeanor that Lao Tzu observed and later pointed out. The people at the inn reacted to Yang accordingly. The owner of the inn felt nervous around him while serving him personally. The other guest hurried out of his way to let him sit where he wanted. The cook and the servants, they all avoided him. Like, who is this guy? Better not get near. Now, because of the penetrating insights from Lao Tzu, Yang thought long and hard about himself while staying at the inn. After much contemplation, he reached a turning point in his mind. By the time he left the inn, it was as if he became a totally different person. The arrogance and attitude that he came with, well, they were gone. So people warmed up to him. They talked freely with him. Everybody joked with one another. They even fought over seats, like where to sit. Yang was amazed by the difference. Before meeting Lao Tzu on the road, Yang initially thought he had the chance of a lifetime to learn from the master. When Lao Tzu rejected him, he thought his chance was gone. Now, as part of the group at the tavern, being among the people for the first time, Yang felt like he belonged, that he was one of them. Then he realized he was correct initially, that in meeting with Lao Tzu, he actually did learn the lesson of a lifetime, one that would benefit him for all of his days to come. The end. The image here that you see depicts a tavern or inn from ancient times. As you can see, there are tables where people can sit down, drink wine, converse, order and eat food. There is a service counter to the left. There is stairs leading up to where the guest rooms are located. So that is the setting of the story. So let's talk about this for a moment. The lesson of a lifetime. So the Tao, you can see now the sages may be brilliant, but the light is not glaring. So Yang, his light was too strong. That's what Lao Tzu was pointing out, that he was so powerfully aggressive and arrogant that it would turn people away. Now, his lesson to Yang was that you have to mix with the dust. You have to be among the people as a cultivator of the Tao. You're not apart from them. You're not above them. You're not superior to them. You are with them. The same lesson applies to all of us. Just because we are studying the Tao, it doesn't make us superior to anyone. Makes us different, maybe, but not intrinsically better. We got plenty of problems and flaws and faults ourselves. Then, this is all about being illuminated, not flashy. So you have to be careful that even though you can be spiritually illuminated, that it isn't such a powerful light that it becomes flashy, that you are showing off. You have to dim the glare. You have to make your light soft. And ultimately, that results in you being straightforward or down to earth in mixing with the people, and that's where mix with the dust comes in. So Yang took that lesson to heart. It became for him the lesson of a lifetime. We too can take the lesson to heart. It too can become one of the lessons of a lifetime for us. So how do we apply this? So think about the workplace. Seniority at the workplace is not an entitlement. What I mean by that is when you have more experience or expertise than your coworkers, that doesn't entitle you to privilege. Your experience, expertise, seniority, it's actually a responsibility. You have a responsibility to mentor, to coach, to guide other people who don't have as much experience or as much expertise. So that's how we can apply that to the workplace. How about to the Tao? Spiritually, knowing more about the Tao should not make us arrogant. That will be ironic. It should be humbling. We are fortunate to have access to authentic teachings. Therefore, the authentic teachings talk all about humility. So how ironic would it be if we feel like we know more and become more arrogant as a result? Then let's talk about among friends, socially, or just the people that we interact with. Maybe even the people that belong to other groups that have less blessings than we do. So think about that. Many people out there are less fortunate than we are. You know, we're very fortunate to be able to gather together as we do, to be able to learn from the ancient wisdom and so on. You know, this requires technology, requires access, requires a certain amount of wealth that we possess in order to be able to do this. Many other people out there don't have the opportunity, don't have the means. So something to point out in the Tao is that, well, none of us had a choice as to what kind of environments we're born into. We did not. So the person who is less fortunate, that could just as easily be you or me. So for us to have the blessings, it's a gift. It's something for which to feel gratitude rather than arrogance. So this all goes back to the last line from this chapter, illuminated without being flashy. Let's go ahead and summarize everything that we have talked about today. We previously spoke of the process, the progression to go from confusion to wisdom. When we attain the level of wisdom, we become at the level of the Tao sage. So I want to point out that moving towards enlightenment, it is all about the first word in each of the 4 lines, 14, 15, 16, 17, that when you become wiser, more enlightened, you also are being right, have integrity, down to earth, and you provide spiritual illumination. On the other hand, there are obstacles. So the reason why I told the story about the drunk who was getting nowhere, was still tied to the dock, was because his attachments held him back. And in the 4 lines, the last character, scathing, piercing, ruthless, flashy, these are all results of attachments. Attachments to the ego, attachments to being seen, getting attention, being appreciated. Those are all attachments holding you back. So with these 2 graphics, I want to utilize them as a way to summarize everything that we're talking about. Now it is time to do the paraphrase. The purpose is to demonstrate understanding by rephrasing the original with modern language. Chapter 58. So in the first section, we talk about governing, which, as I mentioned, is just managing one's life, managing one's relationship, interactions, and connection with people. So let me offer the paraphrase as follows. A wise emperor rules without piercing scrutiny, so the people can relax and live simple lives. The unwise ruler, on the other hand, wishes to monitor and restrict everything, and that forces people to use evasive tactics. So with that paraphrase, I hope you see exactly what Lao Tzu was getting at. He's using a metaphoric emperor to compare to the way that you live your life. If you are harsh, people avoid you. If you are easygoing, people can relax in your presence. Then let's go ahead and proceed to section 2. This is the section that I said was potentially life-changing. It's about fortune and misfortune. And here's the paraphrase for that. In life, misfortune and fortune often depend on and give rise to one another. For example, when you are defeated, it may motivate you to stage a triumphant comeback. When you enjoy good fortune, you may become complacent and therefore create misfortune down the road. So the two revolve around one another. That's the basic point there. So the third section is about the confusion of the people in regards to fortune, misfortune, rightness, strangeness, goodness, wickedness. So here's the paraphrase for that. It is similar with other aspects of life. So what you think of as right may get twisted, and what seems to be good may turn out to be bad. This can be extremely confusing for people who do not understand the Tao, and this is the way it has always been. It's not likely to change as we go forward in time. Human nature has not changed since the time that Lao Tzu wrote the Tao Te Ching. So what he described has held true throughout history, still true today, will be true in the future. Now the last section is about the sages. This is the section we have just covered, the characteristics. So here's the paraphrase for that. How do the sages handle this? They hold themselves to a high standard, but they don't impose it on others. They require integrity in themselves, but they don't demand it from others. They can be very direct and yet remain gentle. They illuminate the path for people without blinding them. So that is the aspiration for us, is to become more like the sages. So finally, as usual, we have the full circle discussion for 58. In the very last line of 58, Lao Tzu says the Tao sages illuminates without being glaring. And here's below the yin and yang symbol is the last line. Now, we want to link it back to the beginning, and the beginning talks about the wise ruler being easygoing, so people can relax. Like that. And this goes back, of course, to the very end, forming a full circle. So now the connection is clear. In a leadership role, which is what the ruler symbolizes, a leadership role, you want to apply a gentle touch and not be overly demanding. Now, you can be too easy as well. So as it is with the Tao, in all other aspects of life, this is all about moderation, the point of equilibrium, not too hard, not too soft, just right. So the aspiration for all of us is to be a source of illumination for others, rather than the bright glare of criticism or harsh words. And finally, illuminated without being flashy. That's the bottom line for this particular chapter. And now we have concluded our discussion of 58. It took quite a while, but I think you may agree with me when I say that the effort and the time will be very worthwhile as we reflect upon its lessons later on in life. We spoke a little bit. This is a summary from the previous meetings. We spoke today, we touched on misfortune and fortune, how they can transform from one to the other and back. And we also talked about, in the last part, the characteristics of the sages, that they are righteous without being scathing, they are incorruptible but not piercing, and straightforward without being ruthless, and illuminated without being flashy. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.